To the workshop on Coon Creek Watershed District's new rules, and thank you all for joining us. Before I jump in, I want to introduce myself and the other folks that will be presenting today. So my name is Erin Edison, and I'm the coordinator of the regulatory program for the Coon Creek Watershed District. I'll be talking about the wetland rule and the buffer rule later in the presentation. You'll hear from Abby Lee, who does most of the in-depth reviews of permit applications in concert with our engineering consultants from Stantec. She'll be talking about our new review process and the major changes in the new rules. You'll also be hearing from Eric Bai. He coordinates the erosion and sediment control inspections and works on permit closeout. So he'll be talking about the soils and erosion control rule. And last but not least, you will hear from Eileen Weigel, who is our district engineer with Stantec. Stantec is responsible for reviewing projects for stormwater, floodplain, and culverts and ditch crossings. So she'll be going over that information for us today. For this workshop, we really wanted to give folks the opportunity to ask questions. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please put those questions in the chat. We'll have someone monitoring the chat that will let us know if there are questions pertinent to what we're talking about at that time. Other questions we'll save and go through at the end. If there's a question that presenters don't fully understand, we'll ask you to unmute and provide further context for your question. Before I turn things over to Abby, I wanted to just touch on the purpose of this program and our regulations. It's really about protection and prevention. So the purpose of regulation is to protect citizens and water resources and prevent problems that can result from development activities. I'm sure you've all heard at least some variation of the saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And that's why prevention and therefore regulation is so important. So with that, I will turn it over to Abby to discuss the new application process.
Hi, everyone. So we've made a number of changes to our application process. The first is that we now use an online application portal, and you can find this link on our website. It's a partial fill in the blank, such as the project name, the contacts for the project, some numbers like the area of disturbance and the amount of impervious. And it also lets you upload all of the project documents through the portal. We will do a completeness review within 15 days of receiving an application through the portal. This is where we go through that application and make sure all of the documents and major items required for the type of the project are included. This doesn't actually determine if the project meets district requirements and is approvable. It just determines that we have enough information to begin the review process. If it is determined to be incomplete, we'll indicate what's missing from that application and send you an email notification of that. And the project could then get bumped to a later board meeting to give us more time to address these deficiencies, depending on what's missing or how complex the project or the issues with the project may be. If we deem the application to be complete based off this review, we'll automatically proceed with a full review for the applicable board meeting based off when you applied. Our goal is to be in communication through this process and provide comments as we go so that we can address all of the things and keep it moving. As before, our board approves all the projects and permits are issued when conditions of approval are met. Closing a permit can take place when the project is complete, appropriately stabilized, and all of the stipulations of the permit have been satisfied. I also wanted to mention that prior to applying for a permit, we encourage all applicants to schedule a pre-application meeting with us where we can go over design or any issues or complexities of the site that there may be. So we'll discuss many of these major rule updates later in the presentation, but a quick overview of these changes include that we've clarified the applicability of each rule, our new 30-day review period. We now have size thresholds for erosion and sediment control and the stormwater sections and when those apply to a project. We do have a compensatory storage threshold for the floodplain impacts. And please note that we only regulate to the district floodplain elevation, not FEMA. And if you do not have those elevations, please reach out to us and we can provide those to you. We have new applicability for the drainage, bridges, culverts, and utility cross-section rule, including requirements for biota passage. We now have buffer requirements. We've updated our definition section in hopes to make them more clear for everybody. And our stormwater section has been updated as well. You can see a few things listed there, but Eileen will go into those in more detail on the next slide.
Okay, thanks, Abby. As Erin mentioned, I'm Eileen Weigel. I'm the district engineer, and I'm going to go over Rule 3.0, which was really the stormwater section. There's a lot of similarities between previous rules. What we've done is look to clarify and provide language of things that have been regulated, but is now clearly stated in the standards and the scope and applicability. So as you can see on the slide, the scope and applicability have been updated to have specific thresholds for different types of projects. As you said, it's any project excluding the public road projects that creates 10,000 square feet of new or fully reconstructed impervious surfaces. Any non-residential or multifamily project that creates 5,000 square feet of new or fully reconstructed impervious surfaces that is located within 1 mile and drains to an impaired water, or any public road project where the sum of new and fully reconstructed impervious surfaces equals 1 or more acres. I recommend people pay attention to the definition section for what fully reconstructed impervious surfaces includes, as that is a very common question. The standards, what's highlighted here below are some of the main differences between the previous rules and what the rules are as of January of 2023. We've always had modeling requirements. However, we want to point to the fact that it's now explicitly stated that the downgrading of curve numbers or the addition of soil amendments when mass grading is proposed are now required, and the curve numbers and soil amendments can be found on the district website for additional guidance. Peak runoff rate, it's still very much focused on the 2, 10, 100 year, 25 if we have drainage sensitive uses, but we're focused specifically on per discharge point as it leaves the site. The stormwater volume management went from 1 inch to 1.1 inch. Unless, caveat there is unless you're doing a public road project, it may be including the 0.5 inches. Water quality section is potentially one of the larger changes. If you are no longer able to provide infiltration, we now apply a TP factor, and that needs to be taken into account when sizing your stormwater BMPs. The TP factors are clearly listed in Appendix C of the rules and can be referenced on the district website. There's also additional treatment train options for when a site has site constraints that don't allow for infiltration or a project is having difficulties meeting its BMPs directly on the project site itself. And we now require water quality modeling for projects that also are not able to infiltrate. We assume that if a project is able to infiltrate, they're meeting the district's 80% TSS removal, which is the same value that you've seen in previous rules. However, now if a project is unable to infiltrate, we want to see explicit water quality modeling to indicate that that TSS is in fact being met. Section 3.3.5 of the stormwater is discharges into wetlands. This is an entirely new section where we look at both the bounce, the inundation, discharges into wetlands on site. There's a very detailed table that indicates based off of the wetland how a project must meet those requirements. And lastly, the district in the past has had a low floor, or has referred to the city's low floor freeboard requirements, where we now explicitly have our own low floor freeboard requirement, which is 2 feet separation from the 100-year high water level, or 1 foot from the EOF to the low floor, not the low opening. One thing to note is this will set the requirement for the city of Ham Lake, as they are following a 1 foot separation still at this point. The rest of the cities are aligned with this 2 foot separation from the 100-year high water level. And I will turn it over to Eric to, oh, sorry, my bad. So this is to also provide additional information of really what we need to see submitted so that we can move this process along as fast as possible. So I don't necessarily need to go through and read all of this, but really what we need to see is just clear narratives that address the applicable rules and requirements, and supporting evidence. We are also providing tables on the website that illustrate what we fill out in the staff report. So if someone is able to provide those exact tables directly in their submittal material, this would be very helpful in, once again, moving a project along faster, and provide clarity on some of the issues or questions we tend to have while doing reviews. I wanted to be able to provide some of the information we can provide to applicants ahead of time, include information on existing regional treatment options. Especially we tend to see these on areas of large scale development, shopping districts, that type of item. And we typically have information that we can help an applicant utilize those regional treatment options for. We are able to provide some of the potential site constraints, such as drainage sensitive uses and the district floodplain elevations. We're also able to provide truncated district XP swim models. These will typically be used for projects that are going to influence public ditches, or the floodplain itself. We do not provide GIS or CAD files for floodplain, as site-specific information tends to provide better delineations for that type of item. A couple items of frequent issues to note is just not providing that clear narrative or supporting information up front. If we're unsure or if it's unclear, we have to assume a project is not meeting the requirements, and therefore that's when we push it back to an applicant. Some of the information that tends to be missed more frequently are those discharges into wetlands, but also if a project is in redevelopment and no phase 1 or phase 2 have been provided, it's unclear if there's potential for contamination and if infiltration if infiltration is allowed, or a project site should actually have filtration. And once again, because it's relatively new, is the tables not being provided per discharge point, just an overall site project rate for rate control. And lastly, using a single groundwater elevation instead of modeled soils and surrounding resources to determine seasonal high groundwater for a project site. And as many of you are probably aware, infiltration systems have to meet that 3 foot separation requirement on site in order to be allowed. And lastly, the items to note we typically deal with the engineers and maybe the owners, where then these projects are going to get pushed to the contractors, and then the developers will be the final say. Information we feel should be passed along to the developers and contractors from the engineers are the infiltration tests or the underground system testing for infiltration or filtration systems. We need to be able to test these systems after they're being constructed. this is to be able to provide this information. So as I've noted, underground infiltration systems will have a slightly different method. For infiltration, we want to be testing post-excavation prior to rock placement. We feel as though this would be the best representation of infiltration. Filtration underground systems, we are going to, at this time, move forward, assuming that as long as the correct material has been used for installation, that will be able to meet the so-called filtration or infiltration test, which requires someone from the Coon Creek Watershed District or a representative to be present during construction to verify this at the time of installation. And now I will pass it over to Eric.
Are there any questions in the chat, first of all, about Rule 3? No. Okay.
No, not yet. All right, like Aaron mentioned earlier, my name is Eric. I deal mostly with inspections and closeout of projects once they're permitted for the district. And I get to talk about everyone's favorite topic today, soils and erosion control. So really, I want to just kind of cover the changes to this rule regarding mostly the applicability and the standards, and then also provide a few recommendations based off things that I see in the field on our sites. So first, the major change to the applicability involves the area of land disturbing activities that requires a permit under this rule. So the updated rules say that a project disturbing over 10,000 square feet and within 300 feet of a water body, or projects disturbing over 5,000 feet that are within 50 feet of a water body and draining to that water body, now require a permit, along with projects that disturb over 1 acre or a project that triggers any other rule would also need a rule or a permit under Rule 4. As far as the standards go, most things are the same, but the updated portion of the standards is now any project with soils that have an erodibility factor or KW value over 0.15 require temporary or permanent stabilization within 24 hours of construction activity ceasing. So that's an update from the old rules, and then there's still a 7-day stabilization for any other type of soil on the project. Those erodibility factors can typically be found on Web Soil Survey, so look there first. If you can't find it there, we can also share that information with you. That's pretty much it for the new update on the rules, and some recommendations that I have based off of just field observations are first that I think we all know this, but no BMP is permanent and without maintenance needs. Even silt fence and bio rolls that are installed perfectly will eventually need to be maintained. So a way that SWIP designers or erosion sediment control plan designers can kind of help with this is if you're putting bids together, just include either a separate line item for BMP maintenance, or just make sure that that's somehow included and communicated in some of those bids. The next one is, I know everyone loves to put silt fence all around their projects, but I actually recommend using like muck or topsoil berms in place of those for perimeter control. The reason is that these are actually cheaper. Typically, they require less maintenance, and they're usually more effective than silt fence or bio rolls on sites, especially for like large scale development projects. These are really good BMPs to use, so I'd recommend that. Next, the use of cover crops for temporary stabilization is something I would say is the most missed or lacking area of erosion control for the district. So, just emphasize that on your plans to use cover crops like winter wheat or oats. They germinate pretty quickly. They're pretty cheap to use, so I'd recommend using that, emphasizing that. And that's pretty much it for the recommendations. And just to kind of summarize, the big changes are the updates to the area of disturbance thresholds, and then that new erodibility factor regarding stabilization. And with that, we'll go back to Aaron for Rule 5.
Any questions in the chat about Rule 4?
There was not one about Rule 4. We did have one going back just a little bit about not using FEMA floodplain and where people can access the district floodplain. I did answer it in the chat, but wanted to just reiterate to everybody that this district floodplain is not a published map. And if you are needing that elevation, you can reach out to us and we can provide it for you.
Thanks, Abby. All right, Rule 5 is wetlands. So it applies to any activity that results in filling, draining, excavating, or otherwise changing the hydrology of a wetland. We're the LGU that administers the Wetland Conservation Act anywhere within our legal boundary. So Rule 5 incorporates the Wetland Conservation Act by reference. And the gist of it is basically that projects need to go through the WACA process if necessary and abide by those requirements. CCWD does not have any requirements above and beyond the Wetland Conservation Act, with the exception of the stormwater discharge standards that Eileen mentioned in the discussion about stormwater and Rule 3. That's pretty much it. It has not really changed since the old rules. So that's the short and sweet. And we will turn it back to Eileen.
Thanks. So Rule 6 really is actually focused on the floodplain. As you've noted, it does become applicable in Rule 3.0, the stormwater, but Rule 6 is really the floodplain rule itself. And I want to iterate is we are in the process of working through being able to publish the maps so that it is easier for the cities and the applicants to be able to find the information. It's a process we're working through with the DNR and hopefully will be more readily available in the future. But at this time, as Abby mentioned, these floodplain elevations can only be provided from district staff or a representative of the district at this time. So where the bigger differences for these updated rules, as noted a few times now, is this is the floodplain is mapped and modeled by the district and not by FEMA. The district model has been updated with more recent information. We feel as though this does provide everyone in the district a much more representation of what's currently happening based off of current climate, topography, and that type of information. And that's why we regulate to it. It is not to create a burden for applicants or residents. Some of the other things to note is the compensatory storage is still at a 1-to-1, but what we want to make sure is that the compensatory storage is provided within a relevant reach. And it needs to take into account conveyance. So this is not, if you're doing a cut and fill and you need to provide your cut volume at a different maybe slightly off site or somewhere in a much larger scale, is we want to make sure that it still has the proper impact or compensatory storage within that relevant reach. Typically, a relevant reach would be in between an upstream and a downstream culvert that is associated with the project. However, please reach out ahead of time to verify if you have questions. Another change with the floodplain standard is that there is a one-time 50 cubic yard deposition allowed without providing compensatory storage per parcel. It will be tracked by the district. So this does not mean like if a parcel is sold to a new owner that they can also provide that 50 cubic yard of deposition. It's per parcel, it sticks with that parcel, and it will be tracked. Road projects are tracked on a case-by-case basis, and we'll work with the applicant to determine those requirements at that time. And I think that's it for the floodplain rule.
Are there any questions on that?
We had a question about the low floor freeboard from Aaron. I don't know if he wants to unmute. I guess I didn't get exactly what the question was.
Yeah, I guess just more looking for clarification as well with that. Just is that 1 foot EOF separation for wet ponds only, or what about instances with infiltration basins that aren't holding a normal or rear yard emergency overflows?
So the emergency overflow, as we've been realizing over the last few months, is there are times that we will need to provide clarity just based off of the the design details. But typically an EOF, I'm gonna go with typically, an EOF is kind of set at that outlet elevation or the 100-year elevation. So, you know, it is that it's, I don't know if there's a perfect answer to your question, but we are typically seeing that 2 foot freeboard from the high water level is still what's governing the low floor elevations.
Okay, I guess I'm thinking of like doing housing developments and then backyard backs up to backyard and we have the storm sewer coming through to keep those low floors above the EOF. We wouldn't be able to have any lookouts or ramblers or any of those.
It's very possible that will be a requirement, and we do pay attention to those backyard drainages. We've had a couple projects that have come in, and it's possible that would govern what type of house can be built. We have been having issues in the district in the last few years with lookouts and not being properly constructed based off of what was approved. So we are looking to provide a slightly more conservative approach at this time.
Okay.
Unless there's other questions, I'll keep moving on so you can actually, yeah. So once again, this was the supporting material for that floodplain rule. Is what we really want to see is a figure that shows the cut and fill locations and the cross section of those cut and fill locations, so we can verify elevations used and that the volumes are correct. You know, typically when we're doing our engineering review, you know, we are provided the information. However, it is our job to verify that those calculations are provided, and that's the importance of those cross sections and the general figure with the cut and fill. So very similar to Rule 3.0, the district can provide the XP swim model. You know, we do not provide the GIS and the CAD files. We are more than willing to provide the relevant reach that compensatory storage should be located within. Any questions ahead of time, once again, you know, please ask them prior to a submittal so that you're not looking at significant design changes after the fact. Frequent issues, once again, it's not understanding that we don't just look at compensatory storage, but we need to make sure that the conveyance is also similar to what has been previously provided. This is typically more in what would be considered a floodway, or if a floodplain has changed and you're cutting off an area of floodplain that can no longer access the larger system. Also, these floodplain fills do typically take slightly longer to review. So the sooner the information can be provided, the faster we can get these turned around. One item to note is that we do require surveying post-construction for the compensatory storage to verify that what was stated in the application is what was actually constructed. And that would also be information that would be ideal to pass along to the contractors and to the developers so that they can get out and survey it when they're surveying other items on the site. And now Rule 7.0, which is drainage, bridges, culverts, and utility crossings. There's not been a significant amount of changes between previous rules and the current rule. But what was highlighted here in the scope and applicability is that in the past, we have assisted with looking at in the installation or the changes of culverts and private ditch systems. We have now officially included it in the applicability. You can see what's highlighted, what's bolded here is that it still only applies to a public or water through a conveyance system, which includes now private drainage system that extends across 2 or more parcels of record, not under common ownership, and has a drainage area of 200 acres or greater, including by placing or altering a utility bridge or culvert structure within a system. So if it's on a private drainage system, it extends across 2 or more parcels and has a drainage area of 200 acres or greater. We now need to see calculations that the proposed system will meet the capacity requirements. We are also looking at the aquatic biota passage on certain waterways. We currently follow the MnDOT standards for aquatic biota passage. Typically, this would be more for larger crossings. It will most likely impact more public entities. However, it's not to say that you shouldn't be asking questions ahead of time on that aquatic biota passage opportunities if a new culvert or replacement culvert becomes an item on an application.
Any questions on that?
Nope.
So to go into a little bit more depth, some of the supporting material that we need to see are the hydraulic calculations for new crossings. Typically, this is a model because of the complexity of the hydraulic calculations needed. It does have to take into account the full upstream drainage area and potential tailwater conditions. For in-kind replacements, calculations that illustrate matching capacity are what are going to be typically required. We can provide the XP swim model once again, and another item that if it is a public ditch, a lot of the public ditches have approved elevations that we can provide. There will be times in which installing at existing center lines would make sense. However, an applicant should reach out to see if the approved elevation varies from an existing elevation and if it should actually be set at that number. Some of the frequent items missed, once again, are understanding that there are public ditches that have approved elevations that may need to be considered for installation, and not providing a 4-foot clearance between top of utility lines and the bottom of the ditch elevation. That is explicitly stated, and that is very much related to the potential for needing to do any maintenance on the ditch and making sure that there's no conflict with the utility line or that it would have to be changed due to ditch maintenance requirements. And all of these items, whether it's a in-kind replacement or a new crossing or a utility line, will all require as-built at the end of the project. Now I will turn it back over to Erin.
So we're going to talk about Rule 8, which is buffers. So the thing to understand about this rule is that it doesn't apply on its own. It only applies if the project needs a permit under another rule. It also only applies if any part of the disturbed area is adjacent to one of the mapped water resources that we have mapped on our website, and there's a link there. So the definition of adjacent is important here. It's defined as joined by a continuous surface connection with obvious downslope direction of flow or within the 100-year floodplain of the water body in question. So what we're really looking at is, does runoff from this site impact the water body? And if so, then we need that buffer. The buffer can be any vegetation that is permanent and perennially rooted. So this can be turf grass. In the rule, there's a minimum width and an average width. So this is to allow for averaging in cases where it's not feasible to have a consistent buffer width for the whole site. So for averaging, you'll take the linear feet of the edge of that water body and multiply it by the average width. And then as long as you meet that square footage, the buffer can be any width between the listed minimum width and double the average width. And then aside from that, the only other requirement is that there need to be buffer signs installed at the lot lines and every 200 feet between lot lines, excuse me. And that's it for the buffer rule. Are there any questions regarding that? Okay.
No.
So that's all we had for our sort of overview, and then we'll be looking in the chat for any questions that we can answer.
See Jason's question.
Is CCWD going to require permanent easement over buffers? No, not at this time. Okay, Teresa says she would like additional clarification on the 24-hour stabilization. Eric, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so basically any soils on site that are above KW value or soil erodibility above 0.15, which in the district is about 60 to 70% of the total area, will need to be stabilized within 24 hours. So if you are familiar with the MPDS rule, you know, there's is initiate stabilization immediately and has to be done within either 7 or 14 days after construction stops for 7 or 14 days. But in this rule, it'll be if construction is stopping for more than a day, that needs to be initiated immediately and finished within 24 hours for those highly erodible soils.
So you're anticipating that somebody's going to stabilize and try and grow things every weekend?
Not necessarily.
You know, stabilization. I mean, the way, there's a comment on one of our permits that came in, and it says it should contain a note that says stabilized within 24 hours after construction activity in that area has temporarily or permanently ceased. And so we're wondering, I mean, are you going to ask for stabilization every night, every weekend? I mean, what is, can you
Yeah,
yes, I'm familiar with MPDES, which is the 7 days or 14 days and those
Right.
items, but
right. And we know that that's not going to be always feasible. It's more about getting people to understand that these things need to be stabilized. Then that needs to be initiated immediately. And, you know, if it's not feasible to do it, we understand that. But it's more about getting this on, you know, the forefront of people's minds, and also thinking about not disturbing all of the vegetation all at once, and sort of taking things step by step too. So
the other piece that we have a question on would be if erosion and sediment controls per an approved SWIP, you know, are in place and construction activity is continuing on a daily basis, are we considering that those erosion and sediment control measures are enough? I mean, I guess that's the clarification we really want. I mean, I'm not sure how to, you know. I'm not sure where this 24-hour is coming from and how you can actually enforce that. So we would like definitely,
Sure.
I mean, I'm not sure we're going to be able to put a note on our plan set that says that will stabilize every 24 hours.
Yeah, and maybe it's more more accurate to say, and this is something we could maybe amend the rules, is if construction is going to be ceasing for seven days, then it needs to be stabilized in 24 hours or something.
That makes
Something
sense.
like that.
That follows the MPDES rule.
Sure.
I get that. I'm just, the way this is written, it sounds like you want stabilization every night. And then
Right.
if
And
it's
that's
not occurring for 24 hours,
Right.
well, what if they take the weekend off or they have a holiday or something? Are you,
right. Yeah.
and to me, that's where the erosion and sediment control measures of mats or biologs or silt fence or things along those lines.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Jason is, I was going to ask, that was my other question also, is where do we find this erodibility factor?
Eric?
I'm pretty sure. So if you look on like Web Soil Survey to find your soils information, it tells you, you know, there's like the physical parameters of the soil type. I'm pretty sure that KW value is one of those factors that's listed. I also know Anoka County has they update a list of the soil types in the county, and they also provide similar kind of physical factors, and the KW values listed there as well. And maybe we can find that and put a link on our website.
We should put that on our website. That's a very good idea. So Jason is asking how prevalent those soils with an erodibility factor of greater than 0.15 are in the district.
It's around 60%, I would say, of the total area. You know, it's a lot of the fine sands, which are everywhere. Top of my head, it's, you know, Isanti fine sands, Zimmerman fine sands. Those are kind of the two main ones I'm thinking of. But yeah, they're pretty prevalent, I guess, to answer the question.
And that's another reason why maybe we should clarify that 24-hour thing, because it's not just small pockets, it's a lot of it. But that also goes to show how much stabilization really is needed.
Great. And to kind of bring this into a bigger picture, the importance of it is because the district is impaired for TSS and phosphorus and microinvertebrates. So, you know, getting ahead of some of these potential soil washes into the storm sewers or the ditches is incredibly important to make sure that we're in compliance with our TMDL requirements and that, you know, we can meet long-term goals for the district. So I think that might help people understand the importance of this. But yes, there are some potential links and sources we could provide for people.
Yep.
And I think, you know, something that we don't think of very often with erosion control is wind erosion in the district. It's really prevalent, especially with fine sands. They can blow everywhere, especially in our larger sites. You know, so the thing about 24 hours, the odds are if it rains within that 24 hours, that might not be very high, but you know, even moderate winds can really blow around a lot of sediment and offsite too. So I guess that's kind of another idea of the rule.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Yeah.
And this presentation is being recorded and will
Yes.
be provided on the website we'll provide some maybe additional links directly in this presentation for reference and for ease of navigation of the website.
Okay, well, should we, if there's no other questions, I guess we'll wrap it up early. And we can, oh, there's another one. What prompted the change from an EOF from 1 foot below low opening to low floor? That could have some pretty large impacts on forcing lots to be slab on grade.
Well, one, I think we are looking to just provide more clarity and improve our definitions. We have been seeing issues lately with what is being approved on projects for housing types, not actually being what is constructed. You know, we're not looking to create a significant barrier. Once again, the district's always been willing to work with applicants, but we feel as though at this point, it was an appropriate update to the rule based off of what we're seeing is higher groundwater issues or unpredictable groundwater heights and that type of information. So we felt as though of all the things we needed to protect, it was people's homes from this potential flooding and just some future unknowns from a climate perspective.
All right. So we'll wrap it up. And again, this will be recorded. And if you think of other questions, you know, always feel free to reach out to one of us, all of us, and we'll do our best to answer any question that comes our way.